And folks, I hope that you spent a meaningful weekend with friends and family. I hope that you went to church. If you're Jewish, I hope you went to synagogue. I hope you spent some time with God and with your family, with your community, because that's what Charlie Kirk would have done had he not been assassinated last week. We're going to get to all the darkness in the world. There's a lot out there. We're going to analyze what led to the murder of Charlie Kirk. We have new evidence as to what the shooter was doing, what the shooter believed. It is not particularly surprising. We're also going to get to the permission structures that have been created, and it is across the political spectrum. But in this case, and in large scale, we are talking about the political left that has created permission structures for violence. We're going to get to all of that. But I want to start with the actual uplifting reality that millions of people are coming together in memory of Charlie Kirk. So over the weekend, over $5 million was raised for Charlie Kirk's family. Turning Point USA, which is Charlie's organization, according to the New York Post, received 18,000 new chapter requests in less than 24 hours after his widow, Erica, spoke out about the assassination of her husband. And again, it's all heartbreaking and horrifying in every way, except that Charlie's legacy is going to be that millions of people went to church yesterday who wouldn't otherwise have gone to church. Tens of thousands of people are going to get politically involved with TPUSA. Millions more are going to take inspiration from Charlie. There will be a funeral for Charlie scheduled for September 21st, which is next Sunday, at State Farm Stadium, which is home of the Arizona Cardinals. President Trump is promising to attend as well. Again, all of this outpouring for Charlie is truly amazing. It really, really is. And I hope that it's some comfort to Charlie's family. Morgan Wallen, at his concert over in Canada, paid tribute to Charlie Kirk. Here's what that sounded like.
It's been hitting me harder in the last couple of days, and I just wanted to let Erica Kirk know that me and my family are sending prayers their way. Y'all sing it with me if you know.
Chris Martin did something similar. And again, I've been very critical of Chris Martin after some of the incidents with Coldplay, but he was performing and he sent love to Charlie's family.
Let's raise our hands like this and send love anywhere you want to send it in the world. And there are so many places that might need it today. So here it comes from London. You can send this to your brother or your sister. You can send it to the families of people who've been going through terrible stuff. You can send it to Charlie Kirk's family. You can send it to anybody's family. You can send it to people you disagree with, but you send them love anyway.
And again, I think that's one of the things that's coming out of this is that mainstream people, and we'll get to people who are not mainstream in a moment, but mainstream people are coming together around the idea that the core values of the West include things like, I disagree with you and we have discussions and we don't murder one another. NASCAR driver Christopher Bell dedicated his win to Charlie over the weekend. Here's what that sounded like.
This week's obviously been a very tough week, and there's a lot on our mind, and just this one's for Charlie.
The Oregon football coach, Dan Lanning, mourned Charlie as well. Charlie was a major Oregon Ducks fan. Here's what he had to say.
I recently found out Charlie Kirk was a Oregon fan, right? I didn't know that. I heard for his wife, Erica, and their kids, that sort of evil should never exist in our country. And that's what it is. It's evil.
A wide variety of NFL teams paid tribute to Charlie Kirk over the weekend as well. And here were the New York Jets celebrating Charlie's life. You can hear the ovation.
We believe that doing so would make us all better. Charlie Kirk was a bright light in this world that will not be extinguished.
And then Chants of USA broke out at a wide variety of these events. There was a big event held in Washington, D.C. last night, a tribute event and a prayer event for Charlie, a memorial event, which is quite beautiful. Obviously, for Charlie's family, I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine. He had 2 young kids, his young wife. They've married less than 5 years. Kids who are 3 and 1. Erica Kirk released pretty tough video of herself seated by Charlie's casket holding his hand. Hard to watch, obviously.
I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you.
She then did a pretty extraordinary 16-minute message to the public, which she released on Friday evening. Here's what she had to say.
When I got home last night, Gigi, our daughter, just ran into my arms. And I talked to her and she said, Mommy, I missed you. I said, I miss you too, baby. She goes, where's Daddy? What do you tell a 3-year-old? She's 3. I said, baby, Daddy loves you so much. Don't you worry. He's on a work trip with Jesus, so he can afford your blueberry budget.
She then did send this inspiring message. She said, listen, you may think that you killed Charlie's memory. Precisely the opposite. Precisely the opposite. You have no idea what you just unleashed. Erica's a strong person.
The evildoers responsible for my husband's assassination have no idea what they have done. They killed Charlie because he preached a message of patriotism, faith, and of God's merciful love. But they should all know this. If you thought that my husband's mission was powerful before, you have no idea. You have no idea what you just have unleashed across this entire country and this world. You have no idea. You have no idea the fire that you have ignited within this wife. The cries of this widow will echo around the world like a battle cry.
Again, Erica is herself a relatively public figure. She's very involved in the Christian community, in giving. She's been politically involved as well. And her picking up Charlie's mantle would be not only appropriate, but an excellent, excellent thing for her to do. Meanwhile, we now have more news about the nature of the shooter. Now, there are some who at the end of last week were saying that the shooter might not have been somebody of the left. This is a bit of a tete-a-tete that I had with Bill Maher on his show on Friday night, where I explained to him that the shooter was almost undoubtedly a person of the left. And he said, well, you don't know that. Could it have been a Groyper? I said, I mean, sure, it could be a Groyper, but all the evidence does not point to that. Like literally all the evidence points to somebody of the left and somebody who is involved with trans issues. Well, as it turns out, that is precisely what happened here. And that is not unexpected. That is not unexpected in any way, shape, or form. The reason that that is not unexpected is because there are certain ideologies in the United States and abroad. There are certain ideologies that create violent ramifications, that it's inherent in the ideology that there will be radicals of the ideology who engage in violence. Not all ideological movements are the same. The sort of flattening of all ideologies into, oh yes, all ideologies are equally likely to lead to violence. That is not true. No one gets shot with regard to discussions over marginal tax rates. No one gets shot over discussions of raising or lowering the age of Social Security. Right? These are not the things that people get shot over. There are, however, ideologies that breed violence, that breed them. And you can spot those ideologies. You can spot them. They have certain features in common. As we discussed last week, the ideologies that breed violence usually have 3 features in common. Feature number 1 is a conspiratorial view of the universe in which a shadowy cabal of very powerful people are conspiring to make your life worse, to ruin your life. Your failures are not your own. They are the faults of this shadowy cabal, this evil cabal of people. You can't quite name them. You might have some inkling of who they are. And very often these ideologies use the word they a lot. Right? A lot of they. Not specific, they. Second, a belief that your specific group or you personally are targeted for destruction by that shadowy cabal, which leads to number 3, a belief that violence is self-defense, that all the arguments that you are hearing are actually just a facade for power. It's a point made by the terrible left-wing philosopher Michel Foucault, one of the most damaging philosophers in all of history who made the argument that there really are no real arguments and no real discussion points. There's merely power. So if you believe that all arguments, Charlie's arguments, for example, are not arguments, they are just disguises for power, they're a facade for an iron hand, and that he is part of a shadowy cabal of people who are controlling your life and ruining your life and making your life miserable and threatening you with quote unquote trans genocide, well, then you are much more likely at the edges to engage in violence. And we know precisely which sorts of ideologies fit this bill. It is not a gigantic secret. We know which ideologies fit the bill that hit all three of those things. Remember, that conspiratorial view of the universe, a belief that your specific group is targeted by that conspiracy. And three, a belief that violence is therefore justified in pursuit of ending the conspiracy as a form of self-defense. And we know which ideologies fit that bill. Trans ideologies fit that bill because the basic idea there is if you say a man is a woman, that is not an argument. That is not even a statement of biological fact. That is, in fact, a guise for power that you are trying to leverage against me. You're trying to harm me. You're trying to erase me. And therefore, I am justified in ending the pseudo-trans genocide by doing physical harm to you. And this has always been an inherent part of trans ideology. And by the way, the permission structures that have been created around it. That is just a reality. I'm old enough to remember personally being manhandled, and I use that word advisedly, by a man who believed he was a woman on CNN headline news in 2015, and the entire left wing defending the physical assault on national TV. Because again, that was inherent. I was a threat. I was the problem for saying words. Words were a form of violence. And so again, this is just part and parcel of a broader program. Other ideologies have these aspects too. Left-wing Marxism has this view that rich people, by their very existence, are a threat to poor people. They've stolen from poor people. They're exploiting poor people. Their arguments about wealth, their arguments about innovation are not actually arguments. They're maintenance of systemic power structures. And thus they must be laid low. The only way to fight the rich people is to kill them, to do violence against them. This is why Marxist movements generally end with revolutionary violence. It is the thing that lies behind Bill Burr screaming at people, "Free Luigi," after a murderer kills a United Healthcare CEO. After all, that United Healthcare CEO, he was rich. And not only was he was getting rich by victimizing people. And that meant that he totally deserved to be killed. Free Luigi. Or white supremacist ideology, which says that I, as a white person, am being targeted by a shadowy system. Not like a specific law, which again, we can have arguments about affirmative action. Affirmative action is a specific law that redounds to the non-benefit, to the detriment of white people. Okay, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the idea that failures of white people in any way, shape, or form are a result of a systemic, of an evil system that has been cultivated by people of color and or Jews, is what white supremacists believe. And therefore, violence against them is somewhat justified. Or totally justified. BLM had the same aspect. There are systems of racism and oppression in the United States. And arguments about crime rates, for example, are not really arguments. They're just guises for power. And the only way to fight back against those systems is to loot businesses and burn them down and to do acts of violence and then excuse them. Radical Islam makes the same claim. That the very existence of other civilizations that are more successful is a threat to them. Because not that those civilizations are more successful because, they pursue better things. It must be because they are exploitative and terrible, and thus they must be wiped from the planet. This is why the undying hatred of, for example, the Palestinian movement against the very existence of the state of Israel, it won't go away because it's embedded, it's encoded in the system. The basic idea is the existence of Israel is the threat. Again, all these ideologies have that same basic framework, a giant shadowy conspiracy that means that my life is worse. My failures are not my own. They're the result of a system. All arguments made in favor of the system are an aspect of power. Speech is violence. Therefore, I can use whatever is at hand in order to do violence. The reason that I lay all of this out is because it is now quite clear what was happening with this particular shooter. Spencer Cox, the Utah governor, came out over the weekend and said, yes, we now know that the shooter in this case, when Tyler Robinson, was indoctrinated with left-wing ideology. Here he was on ABC's This Week.
You told the Wall Street Journal that Tyler Robinson was deeply indoctrinated with leftist ideology. Have investigators uncovered evidence to show that?
Well, so far that has come from his acquaintances and his family members. That's where that initial information has come from. Certainly, there will be much more information that is released in the charging documents as they're bringing all of that together.
So apparently, the suspect is not cooperating with the police. That, of course, is not a giant surprise. Here is Spencer Cox.
He has not confessed to authorities. He is not cooperating. But all the people around him are cooperating, and I think that's very important.
So what do we know about him personally? Well, we know that he was left-wing by pretty much all available evidence, including people who knew him well, people who have said this openly. According to Kash Patel, we know actually that apparently he left some sort of note saying he had an opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk and that he was going to take it. This is according to Kash Patel, the head of the FBI. He said that the authorities have seen evidence of a text message exchange between the shooter and a second individual. Quote, his family has collectively told investigators he subscribed to left-wing ideology and even more so in these last couple of years. He claimed he had an opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk and he was going to do it because of his hatred of what Charlie stood for. Okay, meanwhile, Spencer Cox says that we know that the suspect in this case had a furry fixation, okay, meaning that he was fixated on this very online, very weird subculture of the internet in which people sexualize animals, fetishize people dressed as animals. And he had a trans boyfriend, which of course is not surprising any way, shape, or form. And the slogans that were etched apparently on the bullets were all gamer and or trans-oriented slogans. Notices bulge, OWO, for example. According to the New York Post, alleged Charlie Kirk assassin Tyler Robinson appeared to have a fixation on furries, while his live-in transgender boyfriend espoused support for President Joe Biden and joked about being mentally ill, according to social media posts linked to the pair. Lance Twiggs, 22, an aspiring pro-gamer, and Robinson's roommate, appeared to have made a comment in a 2022 Reddit post stating, "We are riding with Biden on this glorious subreddit." Twiggs is transitioning from male to female and was in a relationship with the 22-year-old Robinson. This is according to Governor Spencer Cox. By the way, Spencer Cox is no rabid right-winger on this issue. He's been criticized, I think correctly, by many on the right for being too soft on things like the transing of the children. Here's Spencer Cox.
There were reports yesterday that we can confirm that his roommate was indeed a boyfriend who is transitioning from male to female. That's information that the FBI had mentioned yesterday. We can confirm that as well.
None of this is surprising in any way, shape, or form, because the takeaway from this transgender person's boyfriend must have been, and surely was, that Charlie Kirk was somehow a threat to his boyfriend, because Charlie Kirk was clearly correct that his boyfriend was in fact a boy and not in fact a girl. According to Axios, authorities are investigating whether Tyler Robinson believed Kirk's view on gender identity were hateful to people like Robinson's transgender roommate. And they keep calling it transgender roommate. No, you mean boyfriend. Apparently, they had a romantic relationship. And that's a hell of a way to demean the nature of romance, but sure. Investigators believe Robinson's anger at Kirk's views could be a key to establishing a motive for the slaying of Charlie Kirk. Each of the 6 sources familiar with the investigation told Axios investigators believe that Robinson was having a quote-unquote romantic relationship with his roommate. His romance apparently consists of dressing up as a furry and then shooting people to death. Seems about right, sure. Axios' sources said investigators initially wanted the information about the roommate's gender identity kept quiet because that person is being extremely cooperative with authorities. Well, I mean, again, I'm not saying that it's the roommate's fault. It is the shooter's fault. But this is the ideological soil from which the shooter was springing, clearly. Apparently, Cox said on Meet the Press on NBC, while Robinson comes from a conservative family, his ideology is very different than his family. He said, clearly there was a lot of gaming going on. Friends have confirmed there was that kind of deep, dark internet, the Reddit culture, and these other dark places of the internet where this person was going deep. And that obviously is true even from the bullets. The bullets themselves were etched with a bunch of gamer slogans. And again, the sort of unwellness that is associated with people who sit in their room all day playing video games. That is it. That is a real form of social isolation that can have consequences for those with predispositions toward mental fragility, shall we say. Again, it's not that video games are to blame. There are literally hundreds of millions of people who play video games and don't go shoot activists like Charlie. But to pretend that there is no brain effect of doing this sort of thing, sitting in your room all day with your aspiring transgender boyfriend, talking about politics, self-radicalizing, and then going and shooting somebody is to be incredibly, incredibly silly and to ignore that which is right in front of us, obviously. Robinson's bizarre ties to the furry lifestyle have now been revealed, according to the New York Post. An account on the website furaffinity.net, which features sexualized images of cartoon animal characters, features an account name matching one that Robinson used on his various gaming and online accounts, friends told the Daily Mail. According to one official, it's pretty clear Robinson's roommate knew a lot and didn't say anything after the killing, so they are a person of interest officially and are cooperating. We want to keep it that way. I mean, that seems correct. That seems obviously correct. I mean, it wasn't the roommate that turned him in. It wasn't the boyfriend who turned him in. It was his conservative Christian parents who turned him in. And the roommate was receiving messages like, I left my rifle in the bushes. Can you go pick it up for me? It was only when he was confronted by the police as, oh no, really? Interesting. According to the New York Post, Robinson's online presence points to a hodgepodge of liberal ideology, gamer-style humor, and post-ironic memes. Apparently, he was joking around with his pals on Discord, which is another one of these open thread websites. He was joking with his friends that his doppelganger was the one who shot Charlie Kirk after the feds released his photos while he was on the run. According to the New York Post, the 22-year-old accused assassin's chats with his pals lit up on the social media messaging platform Thursday afternoon. One of his virtual buddies noticed the similarity and tagged Robinson, writing WYA, which is short for where are you at, alongside a skull emoji. Robinson wrote back within a minute, said that it was a doppelganger trying to get him in trouble. And people encouraged him to turn himself in to claim the FBI's $100,000 reward. And he said, only if I get a cut. And then there were jokes made about Luigi Mangione. And Robinson just said, quote, he better get rid of this manifesto and exact copy rifle I have lying around. And then the accused gunman went on to mock the FBI's investigation, referencing the trans scribblings found on the ammo and claiming it was all fabricated by some dude in the briefing room. So again, it was only when he was confronted by his parents after admitting it that he was turned in. It was not the transgender partner who turned him in. And again, there were messages from Robinson to his trans partner literally asking him to go pick up the rifle where he had left it. And again, to ignore the inherent violence of certain movements. This doesn't mean that everyone associated with the movement is violent. It does mean that certain ideologies are more prone to breed violence, and anyone who tells you differently is lying to you. It is not a shock that the source of Charlie's assassination is coming from this movement, is involved apparently in this ideology. That is not a shock at all. It is so not a shock that pretty much everybody who heard about what happened to Charlie immediately jumped to that conclusion. Because again, the reason we jump to conclusions is we know which ideologies are most violent. Nobody believes that people who stump for lower taxes are going around just murdering people on the basis of tax rates. Again, nobody believes that evangelical Christians who go to church a lot, that those are the people who are going around shooting people. The reaction to Charlie's death has been gigantic memorials and more people going to church and no violence. There are certain ideologies that breed violence and, in fact, are worse than other ideologies. We should not be culturally or ideologically relativistic about this. As Rich Calder points out, the assassination of conservative pundit Charlie Kirk marks the latest example of a growing wave of murders and other shootings committed by transgender people and others advocating for their rights. The transgender shooter who murdered 6 people at Nashville's convent school in March 2023 raged about hating America, being miserable while being raised as a girl, and wanting to kill all the white kids. And that was hidden by the cops for like a year. It was only Daily Wire that broke a lot of the manifesto. The deranged shooter who slaughtered 2 children and injured at least 21 others at that Catholic school in Minneapolis, identified as a transgender woman. Another shooter, sentenced to life in prison after being found guilty as part of a notorious 2019 mass shooting at a Colorado charter school, told police he targeted classmates who mocked his gender identity. That shooter was born female and then said that she was a male. Said students at the STEM school Highlands Ranch called him disgusting, made fun of him, and repeatedly referred to him as a she. Well, the New York Post should refer to him as a she since he was a she. Another shooter was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Another 26-year-old transgender male killed 3 people and injured 3 others before killing himself during a 2018 shooting in Maryland at a Rite Aid warehouse. Again, the insanity here is coming from a place. And it does have deeper permission structures attached to it. And here is the real problem. I mentioned a bunch of ideologies. Some of those ideologies have broader acceptance among mainstream parts of the American political debate. I named 5 ideologies before that trend toward violence because inherently the ideology makes the claim that there is a conspiracy that is victimizing me, and therefore I am justified in using violence to silence the speech of those people because their speech is violence. Those 5 ideologies were, again, in order: trans, Marxist, white supremacist, BLM, and radical Muslims. Now the question is, which ones of those ideologies find mainstream acceptance? Which ones have had permission structures created around them that make them more mainstream, that wink and nod at violence? Which ones? The only one that could be considered quote unquote right wing, I would argue it's not even right wing, I would argue that it's just racialist, is white supremacists. Is there a mainstream infrastructure that accepts the white supremacists? I will note at this point that Charlie Kirk spent an enormous portion of his career fighting the Groypers. The Groypers literally declared a Groyper war on Charlie Kirk in 2019, trying to take over his organization, TPUSA, from the outside. The leader of that movement literally yelled at me and my small child in a stroller as I walked into a Charlie Kirk event a few years back. Okay, so does that movement have wide mainstream acceptance? No. How about trans? Well, we know that that has wide mainstream acceptance and that the arguments of that movement have been broadly applied across the left. That is a form of violence to say that men are not women. That it is a threat to say men are not women. How about the Marxist idea that rich people need to be leveled? That rich people are somehow doing some sort of violence to poor people simply by their existence. I mean, not only is that widely accepted, that matrix of thought widely accepted, it is elevated by huge portions of our political elite on the left. How about BLM? Well, we know that you were perceived to be a racist if you didn't back the idea that white supremacy was in charge of the country and that this is the reason why there are differential crime rates and differential income rates and differential wealth rates in the United States. And excuses were made for violence. Permission matrices were created for violence for BLM. This is why the media treated $2 billion in property damage and multiple deaths as though it never happened. I mean, BLM was so important that you could literally go outside and cough on each other in the middle of a COVID lockdown because it was that important. How about radical Islam? We know the entire left has now surrounded the idea and is cheering the idea of radical Islam in the form of Palestinian terrorism. We know that there's a reason that all these groups march together. There's a reason that all these groups are on college campuses together, because matrices for permission structures for violence are quite common on the left. This is reflected in the polling, by the way. There is a recent poll that came out from YouGov asking a question: do you generally consider it to be acceptable or unacceptable for a person to be happy about the death of a public figure they oppose? According to Republicans, 77% of Republicans say it is always unacceptable for a person to be happy about the death of a public figure they oppose. 53% of independents feel the same. Only 38% of Democrats believe it is always unacceptable for a person to be happy about the death of a public figure they oppose. Only 38%. That means that some 44% of Democrats believe that it is sometimes acceptable, usually acceptable, or always acceptable, and 18% are unsure. Why? Because again, left-wing views have significant crossover with these permission structures of violence. They do. And you look no further than the elite mockery or rewriting of Charlie's legacy by people to suggest that Charlie was somehow deserving of what happened to him because they didn't like his views. Elizabeth Spears, who's written extensively for legacy media outlets, including the Washington Post, wrote a piece of The Nation called Charlie Kirk's Legacy Deserves No Mourning. None. The white Christian nationalist provocateur wasn't a promoter of civil discourse. He preached hate, bigotry, and division. And now, notice how she is mixing up the content, what she believes to be hate, bigotry, and division, which of course is total nonsense. Go watch Charlie's tapes. Charlie was not preaching hate, bigotry, and division. Charlie was a normie conservative. He was about as normie a conservative as it is possible to be. He held mainstream positions on virtually all things. She says, though, he wasn't a promoter of civil discourse because notice the mixing up of the means with the substance. She disagreed with Charlie, therefore he wasn't promoting civil discourse. Okay, now, I can totally disagree with certain people and recognize that they promote civil discourse, that they at least engage in civil discourse. I've been on a bunch of those shows in the last couple of weeks. I disagree with Abby Phillip on everything over at CNN. Abby Phillip is not promoting violence. We had a civil discourse. Van Jones, right? I disagree with Van on a lot of stuff. Van promotes civil discourse. By the way, a lot of people are angry at Van because of what Van said last week with regard to Charlie Kirk and the horrible murder of the Ukrainian refugee aboard Charlie and Van apparently were trying to touch base behind the scenes. I know that because Charlie and I talked off air before the interview the day before he died, in which Charlie said that he actually liked Van very much and was reaching out to him to try to have him on the show. And Van, I know, because I've talked to Van, actually did get a DM from Charlie and then didn't have time to respond before Charlie was murdered. Okay, there are a lot of people who you disagree with who are perfectly happy to promote civil discourse. But according to mainstream parts of the left, if you disagree with them, you are inherently doing something that does not promote civil discourse and in fact promotes violence, and therefore violence might be just a little bit justified. According to Elizabeth Spears, quote, he was an unrepentant racist, transphobe, homophobe, and misogynist who often wrapped his bigotry in Bible verses because there was no other way to pretend it was morally correct. He had children, as do many vile people. Okay, well, if you're treating this as though this is not a permission structure for violence, you're reading it wrong. It is a permission structure. There's a difference between an overt call for violence and a permission structure for violence. A permission structure for violence says, well, somebody gets shot that you don't like and goes, well, violence is bad, but political violence is bad, but if you're doing that, you're creating a permission structure for violence. And she is when she says things like, I'm sorry for Kirk's children. I don't know if Kirk was a good father, but if he was, that does little to mitigate the damage he did to other people's children. I can only hope for the sake of his kids. They have role models who will teach them it is wrong to profit off the dehumanization of people because of who they are. She says, I'm fairly sure Kirk did not care about my child. She says, I do not believe anyone should be murdered because of their views, but, there's that big word. I do not believe anyone should be murdered because of their views, but that is because I don't believe people should be murdered generally, regardless of who they are or what they've done. All murders matter, in other words. Kirk was fine with murder as long as the right people were dying. Okay, well, this is just a permission structure for violence. That's all it is. That's all it is. And it is promoted by the biggest outlets in America. It is promoted by the biggest outlets in America. The New York Times' Peter Baker, over the weekend, he said, well, Charlie did get people riled up. He did get people riled. Welcome to politics, where we say things that we don't agree with, and sometimes people get riled up. That is the nature of a democratic republic. Here is Peter Baker.
He said a lot of things that got a lot of people riled up, right? And that's part of his, that was part of his style. about race, about gender, about affirmative action and Islam and things like that. But he also enjoyed going to college campuses like the one he was at, even though he knew an audience there might include people who didn't agree with him, and he liked to mix it up. And he's become in this last few days, I think, a symbol of the toxic culture that we're in right now.
All
right. Right. That's a good point. We'll get to more of the news in just a moment. First, when was the last time you bragged about your wireless company? Like, did you know my wireless company gave away 1,000 American flags to deserving vets and forgave $10 million in veteran debt? Did you know my wireless company raised almost $500,000 to prevent veteran suicide? When your wireless company is Pure Talk, there's a whole lot to brag about. You can even brag about the coverage you get with Pure Talk, a 5G network that is insanely fast, dependable, and secure. And you can brag about how much money you save with Pure Talk. Unlimited talk, text, 15 gigs of high-speed data is just $35 a month with mobile hotspot. Obviously, I'm using Pure Talk all the time. I use my phone all the time, which means I'm using Pure Talk. My coverage is excellent. They've got one of the best tower networks in the country. And again, best price. It's time to switch to my wireless company, Pure Talk. But if you need another reason, something you can really brag about, Pure Talk is the only wireless company that gives you a 1-year free membership to Daily Wire Plus when you go to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Again, choose a qualifying plan at puretalk.com/Shapiro and relish your free 1-year membership to Daily Wire Plus. Pure Talk is wireless, worth bragging about. Go check them out right now, puretalk.com/Shapiro. Also, here's the reality. Over 90% of Americans don't get enough dietary fiber. And, that was me. It's very difficult to hit that recommended variety of fruits and veggies. And that's why I started using Balance of Nature supplements. These aren't some artificial knockoff trying to mimic what nature provides. They simply let nature do its job. We're talking about 47 real ingredients: mango, wild blueberry, spinach, kale, shiitake mushrooms, broccoli, the whole works. Plus, their fiber and spice blend is also unique. It combines 4 whole fibers like psyllium, husk, and flaxseed with 12 aromatic spices, including turmeric and cinnamon. You're not going to find another supplement that does this. I also appreciate there are no artificial additives and no added sugars, just clean ingredients. They're vegan, kosher certified by the OU, and gluten-free. You can even mix that powder into smoothies or sprinkle it over your food. No bags, no mess, no measuring. Whenever I'm on the road, they are basically a lifesaver. Hard to keep healthy on the road, but Balance of Nature helps me out. After years of research and development, they've created something that makes getting proper nutrition convenient. Head on over to balanceofnature.com. Use promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer. Plus, get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. I think the greatest example of the willingness of the left to create permission structures for violence is the total insanity of what the New York Times did over the weekend. The New York Times is a pile of steaming hot trash. It is a flaming bag of dog shit, the New York Times. What a terrible, terrible publication. The same publication that ousted Barry Weiss for the great crime of having approved an op-ed by Tom Cotton saying that maybe we should use the National Guard against riots, published an op-ed by Hassan Piker, the Twitch gaming streamer, who has not only created permission structures for violence, he has openly called for violence. And they gave that asshole an op-ed in the New York Times titled, "I was supposed to debate Charlie Kirk. Here's what I would have said." And the entire piece is just a permission structure for violence. That's all it is. The entire piece says that Charlie's killing was an outgrowth of capitalism. It was an outgrowth of homophobia. It was an outgrowth of all the bad things that Hassan Piker doesn't like. Quote, "Even before knowing exactly why Mr. Kirk was killed, I think there are some disturbing and necessary insights that can be drawn from his horrible death. Ideas that affect the way many of my viewers and many of the people who followed Mr. Kirk see the world. The first of these insights is hardly new. The United States has both very loose gun laws and more violent gun deaths per capita than any other developed nation in the world. The second idea is more general and is connected to perhaps why these kinds of killings happen in the first place. Violence almost never originates in a vacuum, and the killing of a high-profile political content creator speaks to a breakdown in our social order. Any answer about civic decline in America has to include a discussion about the failure of our political and economic establishment to reconcile with social challenges that have touched every place and aspect of American life. The social challenges include rising rents and homelessness, the destruction caused by climate change, titanic levels of inequality, and too many others to name here. Our capitalist way of life, always accumulating, never evening out, leaves more and more people to deal with these problems on their own. So it was lack of low rent, obviously. It was affordability. It was capitalism. This produces feelings of isolation and resentment as material conditions worsen. And considering our society is swamped by, and yet somehow stitched together, by a 24/7 news cycle that too often feeds this resentment, it is little wonder that a country of stressed out gun owners would have so many grim, needless gun deaths. This connects to my final idea. Americans inhabit a culture of violence to which we have become habitually desensitized. There's a connection between our culture of violence and American foreign policy. Yes, it was the war in Iraq, you see. For years, American politics has taken on an increasingly punitive flavor. During the George W. Bush era, Arabs and Muslims were and remain singled out for suspicion. He's just doing the Norm Macdonald joke now. Right? The old Norm Macdonald joke was, if ISIS were to set off a nuclear bomb and kill 50 million people, I fear the Islamophobia. So now Hassan Piker's just doing that joke, but real. During the George W. Bush era, Arabs and Muslims were and remain. Islamophobia killed Charlie, as it turns out. Unbelievable. Wow. What can't it do? The Barack Obama years were not so much a correction as continuity, with drone strikes, night raids, and forever war. What followed in President Trump's first term and in Joe Biden's administration was still more of the same, writes Hassan Piker. Extreme rhetoric about designated American enemies combined with aggressive sanctions and secret operations. A foreign policy organized around punishing and killing our supposedly sworn enemies, diplomacy be damned, conveys the terrible message that we can only kill and maim our way to achieving the world we want to live in. I fear this is most evident in, wait for it, America's ironclad support for Israel. So, pulling a gun or launching a missile has become a part of our national character, a sad reduction of morality to the time it takes for fingers to pull the trigger. Americans, especially younger Americans, feel a sense of growing hopelessness as so many of those in power refuse to listen to their struggles, economic and otherwise. This entire article is a permission structure for violence. You can see why they're doing it. It's because of the war in Iraq that desensitizes us to violence. It's because capitalism and its predation, says the millionaire jackass who gallivants around in muscle t-shirts on Twitch. Hey, you want to know why I'm a little upset about this? Here's the reason I'm a little upset about this. New York Times invites Hassan Piker to write an op-ed obit about Charlie Kirk, a person he disagreed with about everything, as a sort of, what, emblem of decency, as some sort of promoter of decent dialogue. Hassan Piker, the same people on the left, Elizabeth Spires and others, are suggesting that Charlie was not an advocate for, debate. And he was debating Hassan Piker. He had before, apparently. Let me play you some Hassan Piker. You know what a permission structure for violence looks like? It looks like this. Here's Hassan Piker talking just, like 2 weeks ago about his lamentation that Donald Trump was still alive.
A lot of people were concerned. Everyone was so worried for the safety of the big, beautiful president. They were like, oh no, I hope that's not the case. I hope he's not dead. It would be so sad if he died. Except, psych, everybody was stoked. Everybody, oh my God. When it happens, I can't think of anything that so many people can point to without actually saying it. I'm not even joking. What else have we had as a collective, as a society, where we can just kind of point to it without even saying anything and everybody understands it? Virtually everybody understands it. Now, as I've warned you before, evil never dies. As I warned you before, this is a byproduct of the Turkification of the United States of America. Yeah, we were monitoring the situation on Trump's untimely demise. Obviously, it didn't happen. He's golfing this morning. Son of a bitch. That was a lot of fun, though.
Here was Hassan Piker talking about spilling blood in the streets of capitalists. Seems like somebody who... He's very anti-violence, you see. He's really forwarding the debate, Hassan Piker. He's a person you definitely need in the New York Times with an obit about Charlie Kirk, basically blaming his death on capitalism and the natural predations of a country that supports Israel and engaged in the Iraq war, creating exactly the permission structures for violence, creating them. But don't worry, he's nonviolent. Listen to him be nonviolent. Here we go.
Poor people that they can afford housing in Berkeley. I don't know how that works.
Well, my understanding is that the property owners who have properties there choose just not to rent it at all.
Yeah, kill them. Kill those motherfuckers and murder those motherfuckers in the street. Let the streets soak in their red capitalist bloods, dude.
I mean, that's wow. So much nonviolence. I mean, what? Probably he should get an op-ed in the New York Times about Charlie's murder, probably. Or how about this one from 2022 talking about, what should happen to people he disagrees with?
I'm sick and tired of it. Left-wingers, liberals, you need to be showing your opponents
guts on there, okay? You need to be gutting them. You need to be shanking these and letting their intestines just ride on stage. What the is this, man? Slice them up. Slice them and dice them. What the is this? You cannot have a bigger layup.
Okay, and then how about this one, where he said that it doesn't matter if rapes happen on October 7th. Don't worry. He's very opposed to violence. Very, very opposed to political violence, says the New York Times. Probably should give him an op-ed. When I say that the left creates permission structures for violence, it's because they do. Hassan Piker was given a massive profile in the New York Times just a few months ago. Hassan Piker was invited by the New Yorker to speak at the New Yorker Festival. He's being treated as though he was taking pictures with Zoran Mamdani, another pro-terrorist fellow on the left, like 5 minutes ago. Here he was talking about October 7th.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if rapes happen on October 7th. Like, that doesn't change the dynamic for me even this much. So that's the other part of this problem that many people that can't contend with. Like, the Palestinian resistance is not perfect. They're not like so good. They have magical bullets, and there's no criminal elements that could have conducted themselves very differently. Like, that doesn't change the dynamic for me at all.
Here was Hassan Piker justifying 9/11.
This is so insane. America deserved 9/11, dude. I'm saying it.
Here he was saying he had no issue with Hezbollah, another terrorist group. Is there a terrorist group he doesn't love? But don't worry, he's a nonviolent advocate for free speech and solid debate. In the New York Times, don't tell me that the left isn't fomenting violence when they create permission structures and celebrate people who create permission structures and in some cases openly celebrate terrorist violence.
Hezbollah is a paramilitary organization that is also a part of the Lebanese parliament.
Do we like them or no?
I think as a resistance group, they're pretty successful against Israel. But everybody hates them. Like, everybody in the region, a lot of people don't like them. Like,
I like what you like.
I don't have an issue with them, let's just say.
Hezbollah is responsible for the murder of 241 Americans in the Beirut barracks bombings in the early 1980s. Here is Hassan Piker saying that Zionists, by which he means Jews, he does, should be treated as rabid neo-Nazis.
I think, like, this will never happen, but in a totally just world, any kind of, regardless of your background, any kind of Zionist tendency should be treated in the same way as being a rabid neo-Nazi. And you shouldn't even let someone be the fucking local dog catcher as Felix was posting if they've ever exhibited any sort of like positive feelings about the state of Israel. I'm so serious about this.
Probably we should give him an op-ed in the New York Times about the sources of political violence. He can call it "If I Did It." Meanwhile, again, this has spread across a large part of the left. Oxford's president, who debated Charlie Kirk, the president-elect, was promoting political violence just the other day over at Oxford.
To effectively create change in the world we desire. And Side Prop will argue that at times there is simply nothing else that can be required other than violent retaliation. And this is a view I wholeheartedly agree with. The view that some institutions are too broken, too regressive, too oppressive to be reformed. Like cancers of our society, they must and they should be taken down by any means necessary.
Where is the violence coming from? I don't know. It's all a mystery. Remember that Bob Villain character? Remember that guy? The one who was on stage in Britain saying death to the IDF. Remember that? At Glastonbury? Well, it turns out that the same people who hate the IDF and the same people who hate Western civilization more broadly and hate America and hate Trump, it turns out that they are perfectly excited about Charlie Kirk's murder. Just ecstatic about it. Here was Bob Villain saying that he was happy that Charlie had been murdered.
I want to dedicate this next one to an absolute piece of a human being. The pronouns was, were. Because if you chat, you will get banned. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk, you piece of.
So what exactly was he saying there? If you could not hear him there, he said, I want to dedicate this next one to an absolute piece of bleep of a human being. And then he said, the pronouns was, were, because if you talk bleep, you will get banged. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk, you piece of bleep. Then later he claimed that he wasn't actually celebrating Charlie's death because, no, of course not. Of course not. The permission structure of violence. It's not enough to just say political violence is bad. If you say with one hand, hey, I don't like political violence, and with the other hand, let the blood run in the streets of the capitalists. Or, you know why Charlie was shot? It's because of systemic problems with capitalism and the capitalists and the war in Iraq and the people I disagree with. That's why Charlie was shot. And, you know, it's bad he was shot. But if the ideologies you humor are conspiratorial ideologies that end with the result, I don't like this viewpoint, therefore speech is violence and you deserve to be murdered, you are part of the problem. And you should be called out for that. You want to know why the numbers are going up on this? You want to know why the heat is going up? That's why the heat is going up. And the crocodile tears from the New York Times, of all places, while they promote precisely the kinds of people who do this, insane. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, finding that right hire can drag on for months. You're either waiting for decent candidates to apply, drowning in resumes that don't fit, or chasing down people who aren't even looking for jobs. What should be a straightforward thing turns into a frustrating cycle of, the waiting and the sorting. Well, the future of hiring looks a lot brighter because ZipRecruiter's latest tools and features help speed up finding the right people for your roles, so you save valuable time. And now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. One thing that really stands out about ZipRecruiter is how quickly you can connect with the right people for your team. When you see a candidate that catches your eye, you can unlock their contact information right away instead of waiting around or jumping through hoops. Plus, with over 320,000 new resumes being added every month, you're constantly getting access to fresh talent, and that means you can fill those open positions much, much faster than you'd expect. Use ZipRecruiter, save time hiring. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the very first day. If you go to ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire right now, you can try it for free. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. ZipRecruiter is indeed the smartest way to hire. Also, here's a simple question. When was the last time a headline actually told you, the actual honest full story? In today's news cycle, headlines move fast. Very often they only scratch the surface. Data, like, the data that comes from the government, can give you the full picture behind those stories if you know where to find it. Enter USA Facts. It's a not-for-profit organization that pulls numbers straight from the government sources. No agenda, no distortions, just the information on the issues people argue about every day, like inflation, taxes, border crossings, and more. You can explore articles like, what is the current inflation rate? Or how are public schools in the United States funded? Or even, what's in that big, beautiful bill? Here's the best part. They're not inflating the numbers. They contextualize them. They include easy-to-understand charts without the commentary. So instead of just reading somebody's take, you're seeing a trend. That's what we should demand, data that doesn't hide behind opinion. So if you're done with just reading those headlines and you're ready to learn just the facts, head on over to usafacts.org. It's time we had access to the data we deserve. Data before opinion, facts before opinion. usafacts.org can help you get all of that data. Go check them out, usafacts.org. Okay, meanwhile, apparently the left has decided that it's cancel culture now. If you wish Charlie Kirk's death, if you celebrate Charlie Kirk's death and then you lose your job, that's cancel culture. Okay, let me explain. That is not cancel culture. That's not. Cancel culture is where you dig up somebody's 15-year-old tweet because you want to ruin their life. Cancel culture is where you say something that's basically innocuous or inside the Overton window, so to speak, and then everybody comes along and ruins your life. You make a dumb joke on Twitter and everybody ruins your life. Okay, that's cancel culture. You know what's not cancel culture? Somebody saying, I don't wish to pay somebody who celebrates the death of Charlie Kirk. I'm sorry, if you post online that you're very, very happy, if you post a TikTok video yourself celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk and your employer decides, hey, I don't feel like paying you, that is perfectly legitimate. If you say, I don't feel like going to the business of somebody who celebrates Charlie Kirk's death, that is perfectly within your rights. That is also an aspect of freedom. Now, let's be real. All of politics is extremely reactionary. And what that means is that because the left was so enamored of censorship and shutdowns that they shut the Overton window this small, like super tight. There's a reaction by the right, which said that everything that was socially condemned or societally criticized was a form of cancel culture. And that was a bad definition, and it isn't true. You, as an employer, have no obligation to hire a current member of the neo-Nazis. You don't. That is not cancel culture. You, as an employer, do not have an obligation to employ nurses who post on TikTok about how much they're happy that Charlie Kirk is dead. You don't. A cancel culture is a different thing. And we ought to be more specific about it, and listening to the left caterwaul about it. Yeah, guys, my sympathy for you is absolutely zero. Zero. Alrighty, meanwhile, the permission structures of the left incredibly strong. Kathy Hochul has now embraced Zohran Mamdani. She has endorsed Zohran Mamdani, a person who supports terrorism, a person who is on board with every one of the scavenger movements that I have described here. I mean, that is what the Democratic Party is doing. Stop pretending that ideologies are all the same. And you can see it at work over at the Emmys. As the Emmys were last night. And naturally, I mean, first of all, the self-involvement of the Emmys, insane. So the host, Nate Bargatze, he said he wasn't going to do politics, and he didn't. Not so for the people who were there. None of them had a single word to say about the murder of a person who is kind of in their business. I mean, Charlie was certainly in the political entertainment business. There's no question that that's the case, right? He appeared on many of their shows in terms of appearing on late night shows. Obviously, he was the butt of a joke on South Park, which he very much enjoyed, by the way, and thought was hilarious. Not a single mention of Charlie. Not a single mention. But many mentions of support for, wait for it, Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Because then the left is perfectly fine with violent movements so long as they mirror their political priors, so long as they believe that the system itself is corrupt. And these are the benefits. This is what makes Hollywood glitterati nonsense so appalling. Really, truly like nauseating crap. The reason is because these are the greatest beneficiaries of America. These are talented idiots, many of them with the brains of guppies, who are walking around jabbering about politics. This is why Ricky Gervais, years ago at the Emmys, told everybody, you're at the Golden Globes, I believe, said, you're all making asses of yourself. Just stop. No one needs to hear you on politics. You're ridiculous. You have less education than Greta Thunberg. He was right. They still aren't stopping. So you have Javier Bardem denouncing genocide. There wasn't a single word said about Charlie Kirk at this event. Not one. Not one. It's the biggest political assassination in the country in probably 50 years. Not a single word at the Emmys, but plenty of words in defense of terrorists in the Gaza Strip.
Here I am today denouncing the genocide in Gaza. I'm talking about the IAGS, which is the International Association of Genocide Scholars, who study thoroughly genocide and has declared it is a genocide. And that's why we ask for a commercial and diplomatic blockade and also sanctions on Israel to stop the genocide, free Palestine.
Thank you, Javier Bardem. Your words are taken under advisement. Meanwhile, Hannah Einbinder, who I'd never heard of because I guess she's in a show called Hacks. And she is, again, she's like Bernie Sanders, about as Jewish as a ham sandwich, but likes to pretend that she is somehow associated with Jewishness in order to promote wild anti-Judaic left-wing points of view. She decided to use her time to not only promote a terror state, but also to say F ICE, which is just great. She followed that up by suggesting that she, as a Jew, she had to separate off from the idea that the Jews support Israel. No, Jews don't support you. Jews don't support you because you are a clown masquerading as somebody who has any association with Jewishness, while enjoying, again, the best that Western civilization has to offer: fancy dresses, fine wines, $50,000 swag bags, an Emmy award for saying words that someone else wrote. Congrats to you, Hannah Einbinder. And this is what Hollywood is: a virtue signaling, luxury belief, permission structure for violence group of complete dullards.
I feel like it is my obligation as a Jewish person to distinguish Jews from the state of Israel because our religion and our culture is such an important and long-standing, basically like institution that is really separate to this sort of ethno-nationalist state. And in terms of the pledge, it's like many movements, boycotting is an effective tool to create pressure on the powers that be to meet the moment, you know. So the Film Workers for Palestine boycott does not boycott individuals. It only boycotts institutions that are directly complicit in the genocide.
She's a clown. I mean, first of all, it's not even factually true. It boycotts institutions like the Tel Aviv Film Festival, which its great crime is existing. But again, this is what Hollywood is. This is what Hollywood is. It's idiot jokes who pretend to be profound while simultaneously standing for some of the most violent people on planet Earth. This goes all the way back to Jane Fonda standing for fangirling over the Viet Cong. You know, folks, I've gotten a lot of good financial advice over the years. Probably the best financial advice that I ever had is just don't overspend on the big ticket items. That's what will bankrupt you. But good advice is one thing. Actually putting it into practice is another. With Acorns, it's easy to make healthy money habits automatic. Acorns is a financial wellness app designed to help you invest for the future, save for upcoming goals, and make smarter spending decisions today. Getting started is simple. Investments can begin automatically using your spare change, so there's no need for an extensive financial background. The platform builds expert-curated portfolios to ensure money is managed wisely, taking the guesswork out of investing. Whether you're saving for a car, a new home, educational expenses for kids, retirement, or other life milestones, Acorns offers tools to support a range of financial ambitions. There's also an integrated checking account with features that automatically invest, plus an emergency fund designed to help grow savings, all accessible within a single user-friendly app. Sign up now and Acorns will boost your new account with a $5 bonus investment. Join the over 14 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $25 billion with Acorns. Head on over to acorns.com/Shapiro or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 2 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/Shapiro. But you know who they're really excited for? They're really excited for Stephen Colbert, because if there was one hero of the week in terms of free speech last week, it wasn't the man who got shot while debating. It was Stephen Colbert, who is a victim of being paid tens of millions of dollars to do a horrible show with low ratings and blowing extraordinary quantities of cash on his overproduced junkyard of a television late night show. He then went on to talk about, his own heroism for, having been fired for not being a good host. What a hero. What a hero. Well, at least we know they're on the right side of history. Well, these ridiculous people at the Emmys congratulating themselves. The good news is that their reach is relatively limited. I asked my sponsors at Comet, a new web browser by Perplexity, how many people watch the 2024 Emmys? It's too early for the ratings. And how many people go to church in the United States on a typical Sunday? The answer is the average audience for the Emmy Awards telecast in 2024 was somewhere between 6.87 and 6.9 million people, which was an increase over 2023, but still not huge numbers, a little under 7 million people. Meanwhile, church attendance in the United States, Gallup's most recent data indicates regular weekly church attendance in 2025 stands at 20% of Americans, which amounts to somewhere between 66 and 70 million people. And, on a monthly basis, somewhere between 135 and 145 million people go to church. And church attendance is going up. The Emmy ratings, they've been bouncing around, but they're still remaining pretty low. I would imagine that Sunday the churches were packed. That's what the report I was hearing from all my Christian friends. I will say that at my synagogue on Saturday, not only was it packed, but every synagogue that I know, every single shul that I know had a prayer specifically for Charlie, or a speech specifically about Charlie, talking about what he meant to the country. Alrighty, folks, before we go to Member Block, I want to remind you, you should go over to tpusa.com and go and help out. You should join TPUSA if you haven't already. You should go check out Charlie's show today. J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, is hosting Charlie Kirk's show. There are a wide variety of links available over at TPUSA to help Charlie's family, to help out TPUSA. As people have been saying, TPUSA is a great organization to associate with. If you want to start a chapter, you should. If you want to give money, you should. There's Give, Send, Go for Charlie's family as well. I encourage you to go associate more with the folks over at TPUSA. And remember that now that Charlie is no longer here, he's still here so long as people pick up that microphone. That's all of you. And going and spreading the word. All right, folks, we've reached the end of the show. We'll be back here tomorrow with much more. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Zohran Mamdani apparently cannot lift like one of those shake weights. And we now have video of it, and it's pretty impressive. Democrats are starting to retail the person who they think is their front runner for 2028, and all updates from Russia, Ukraine. First, we've been rolling out a lot of new content over at Daily Wire Plus. Journey to the UFC, Dr. Jordan Peterson's Answer the Call, Michael Knowles' new docuseries, The Pope and the Fuhrer, The Isabel Brown Show, premiering September 8th. And now, another announcement to mark a decade of the Daily Wire. We're bringing back the whole crew for a brand new show. Here's your first look at Friendly Fire.
September 10th, we celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the Daily Wire. 10 years of leftist tears. New shows, big moves, bigger targets. And first up is our newest show, Friendly Fire.
We're on the show?
This is it.
No safe words, no moderator.
My original proposal had been that Knowles should be moderator.
We all agree on that.
We're celebrating our first decade and kicking off the next 10 years by doing what we do best.
It's really true.
Picking arguments, starting fights, and filming the whole thing.
This is enough small talk, I think.
I got a little hungry.
I hope that your wife made you that sandwich.
Oh my God. I think we do need a moderator, just a programming note.
September 10th on Daily Wire.
Friendly Fire premieres live September 10th on Daily Wire Plus. If you're not a member yet, now would be the time. Go to dailywireplus.com, use code SUMMER, save 40% on a new annual membership. Well, perhaps Democrats are learning that soy is actually not an amazing nutritional base for all things. They might be learning this from Zohran Mamdani, who is, of course, the likely next mayor of New York City. Now, Democrats have been claiming that he's the hot new thing in the Democratic Party, that Zohran Mamdani is going to lead the way to a bright new socialist future for America, starting with the most powerful financial capital on planet Earth. But if we're speaking about power, if we're speaking about socialist strongmen, Zohran Mamdani, it's going to be hard pressed, no pun intended, to actually be a strongman, pun intended. Zohran Mamdani yesterday showed up at the annual Men's Day Open Streets event in Brooklyn on Saturday, where a bunch of dudes were lifting, apparently. And the 33-year-old socialist, again, he's 33, which is like young in the prime of life. He tried to bench. Now, my dude, let me just say that if you're going to do something like this and you're a public figure, you have to know your limitations. Like Zohran Mamdani must have at some point been in a gym. I mean, maybe not, given how this video went. But if you don't know how much you can bench, this is not a great time to try it out. It's like in front of a giant crowd of people in the middle of a mayoral race. So he shows up and he takes a couple of 45s, like 2 plates, and he stacks them on the bar. So this is maybe 135 pounds total. And now let's just be clear. A decent bench for a man is his own body weight. And that's like a decent bench for a man. Zohran Mamdani, I assume, weighs more than 135 pounds. Maybe not, but I assume that he does. 135 pounds is not a lot of weight, like not a lot of weight at all. Now, I'm not a bench press enthusiast. For the record, I max out at around 200 pounds. So I'm not like an amazing bench press connoisseur. Even I can lift 135 pounds probably 15 times because that's not a lot of weight. Zohran Mamdani, it doesn't go well. Here's how it went in Brooklyn. He has to have this guy. They're cheering him. He does not get 3. He gets 2 very assisted, very assisted bench presses at 135 pounds. So that's not great. Well, Mayor Eric Adams and ex-Governor Andrew Cuomo, both of whom lift, pounced on the opportunity, according to the New York Post. Mayor Adams went to the same exact event and then proceeded to just knock out a bunch of 135-pound lifts. He then called him Mom Scrawny, as opposed to Mamdani. Quote, the only thing he can lift is your taxes. Andrew Cuomo said, it's easy to talk. It's hard to carry the burden. He provided no evidence of his own bench press prowess in his ex post, but I assume that Andrew Cuomo can lift a little bit. His brother Chris Cuomo is very big into the lifting. Also, Mamdani literally had to take off his designer boots to kick a stranger's soccer ball at an inflatable target. So here's the thing. Yeah, I think that for the vast majority of normal men, this is very, very embarrassing. But the left has decided that they are done with male normality, like truly done with it. That the future of the Democratic Party is apparently going to be an extraordinarily feminized party, not just because an outsized share of Democrats are now single women, but also because the kinds of men the Democratic Party wants to attract are not the kinds of men who lift heavy weights. This is why you've seen over the course of the last several years a spate of articles talking about how lifting, going to the gym has become Republican coded. Well, there's no reason it should be Republican coded, except if you just mean that testosterone is Republican coded. The idea that you should stay healthy and that you should lift is Republican coded. And that goes to, why do you want a sort of weak and feminized America? Why do you? I mean, the media clearly do. There's a piece from Axios that is sort of fascinating about the supposed redefinition of identity under President Trump. And there's something very telling about it, how they see identity. Quote, through immigration crackdowns and cultural purges, President Trump is wielding government power to enforce a more rigid, exclusionary definition of what it means to be American. The MAGA movement's obsession with American identity and Western civilization is shaping federal policy far more than in Trump's first term, fueling a reckoning over who belongs and what history should be remembered. So, first of all, why shouldn't we all be a little obsessed with American identity and Western civilization? I thought that's what America is about, like what it means to be an American. And a huge part of that is being the apotheosis of Western civilization. And what are we supposed to represent? Non-Western civilizations? Third world civilizations? Other what is the implication? According to Axios, however, in MAGA's telling, America is the heir to ancient European civilizations built on a Judeo-Christian foundation of white identity, meritocracy, traditional gender roles, and the nuclear family. Notice how they just slide in white identity. Right? Now, the idea of a Judeo-Christian foundation of white identity is a bizarre amalgam of two exclusive beliefs. A Judeo-Christian identity is absolutely, by definition, not white identity. By definition, it is not. Look at the history of the church. Look at the history of the Catholic Church. Look at the history of Protestantism. Look at the billions of Christians all over planet Earth. And you tell me, are they all white? Are they? Because I don't think so. Judaism is a Middle Eastern religion. It began in Israel. Like what are you talking about? How is a Judeo-Christian foundation white identity? Monotheistic religion is by its very nature non-racially based. It is bizarre to suggest that Judeo-Christian religion is biblical values are somehow about racial identity, about whiteness or something. Like that is Axios fundamentally making a gigantic category error. But in order to throw the baby out with the bathwater, they basically have to call all of this racist. Meritocracy also apparently is about racism. You cannot simultaneously hold two beliefs, a belief one in meritocracy and two, a belief in white identitarianism. Those two things are not compatible. Because if you are for a meritocracy, that by definition means that the person who is most meritorious, regardless of color, is the person who should get the job, who should advance in society. Meritocracy and white identity, these two things mutually exclusive. Biblical values, white identitarianism, mutually exclusive. Now, traditional gender roles, that is a part of Judeo-Christian foundations. That is a true part of biblical belief. It's also, traditional gender roles, a foundational part of science, because it happens to be the case that men and women are different, which is why dudes this morning are making fun of Zoran Mamdani for not being able to lift as much as a pregnant lady would. It's kind of funny, right? There is something bizarrely effeminate about Mamdani's performance in the New York mayoral primaries. There just is. And it's strange and it's weird. And maybe Democrats love it. Maybe they're very into the sort of androgyny of the Zoran Mamdani candidacy. But okay, that is a violation of traditional gender norms in a lot of different ways. And the nuclear family, I was unaware that somehow this is bad. Why is the nuclear family somehow bad? American identity, you're telling me, has nothing to do with biblical values, meritocracy, traditional gender roles, and the nuclear family? That would come as a shock to literally every one of the founders, all of them. These tenets, according to Axios, are cast as universal truths, and mantras such as America is an idea or diversity is our strength are dismissed as liberal fictions. Well, hold up a second. America is an idea is not mutually exclusive with biblical values, traditional gender roles, meritocracy, and the nuclear family. Those are all ideals. Those are all ideas. Those are things that we enact in our daily life. But look how Axios has to throw all of it to the wind, right? Axios is expressing the traditional left-wing view of what it means to be an American. Because the reverse, apparently, is what it means. Apparently, no Judeo-Christian foundations to our civilization, no Western civilization at the foundation of America, no meritocracy, no traditional gender roles, and no nuclear family, which is kind of saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, I did write an entire book on this. Okay, Lions and Scavengers is legitimately about the desire by so many to tear away at the fundamental foundations of a successful civilization. And it is about tearing away traditional gender roles and the nuclear family and the meritocracy and biblical values. That is what the book is about. Okay, so not that I was prescient, but like it's all in the book. But this does speak to the Democratic Party and the move to the left that is being fostered by, again, this sort of effete set of liberals at places like Axios or apparently in the New York City primary. By the way, the results of this are very clear. If you get rid of things like biblical values, traditional masculinity, the nuclear family, what do you end up with? You end up with a bunch of rootless and useless young adults. Already coming up, young American adults apparently aren't getting married. They aren't having kids. Things are not going amazing. Plus, Wes Moore, is he going to be the Democrats' 2028 nominee? And President Trump going to send troops into Chicago? How's that going to work? Get to all of that in a minute. First, it can be overwhelming to have too many options. Have you ever been to a restaurant and the menu is like a book and you don't know what to pick? Well, the same applies if you're a business owner who's hiring. It can be overwhelming to have too many candidates to sort through, but you're in luck. ZipRecruiter now gives you the power to proactively find and connect with the best ones quickly. How? Through their innovative resume database. Right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. ZipRecruiter's resume database makes it easy to find the right people for your job openings by letting you filter through candidates quickly to spot the best matches. When you see someone who catches your eye, you can get their contact details right away to reach out. With over 320,000 new resumes being added every single month, you'll have plenty of fresh talent to choose from. That means you can fill your positions faster. It's no surprise ZipRecruiter has become the highest-rated hiring site on G2. Here at the Daily Wire, we're always looking for top talent. Having the great features ZipRecruiter offers would make hiring a breeze for any business owner, big or small. Skip that candidate overload instead. Streamline your hiring with ZipRecruiter. See why 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within day one. Just head on over to this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire right now and try it for free. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. ZipRecruiter is indeed the smartest way to hire. Also, if you're feeling overwhelmed by those back taxes, you are not alone. Maybe you missed that April deadline. Maybe your financial records are all over the place. Whatever the situation, stop putting it off. The IRS is not getting any friendlier. Those penalties, they pile up fast. We're talking 5% every month you don't file, maxing out at 25%. That adds up really quickly. Here's the thing. You don't have to handle all this alone. Tax Network USA specializes in exactly these situations. They've worked with thousands of Americans, employees, small business owners, people who haven't filed in years. Messy books, they've literally seen it all. They know how to sort it out. What sets them apart is their direct access to IRS programs that most people don't even know exist. Plus, they have expert negotiators who actually know how to get results. They'll start with a free consultation to assess your situation. If you qualify, they may be able to reduce or even eliminate what you owe. More importantly, they can protect you from the really scary stuff like wage garnishments and bank levies. The bottom line, don't wait for that next IRS letter to show up in your mailbox. The sooner you act, the more options you will have. Call 800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro to talk to a real expert at Tax Network USA. Take that pressure off. Let Tax Network USA handle your tax issues today. Axios, not apparently spotting the irony, same day has a piece titled, "America's Young People Are Delaying Adulthood Milestones. Why I Can't Imagine Why." Young adults are pushing back the big milestones Americans have historically associated with growing up. Moving out of your parents' house, getting a job, getting married, and having kids. Now again, all of those things are associated with precisely the American values that Axios is condemning the Trump administration for promoting. Biblical values involve, like as in the book of Genesis, you will leave your mother and your father, and you will cling to your wife. Right? That is one of the fundamental hallmarks of becoming a man, is you leave your parents, and you leave their house, and then you get married, and you cling to your wife, and you form your own family unit. That's a biblical value. It is also a traditional stepping stone of the meritocracy. Because it turns out that moving out of the house, getting a job, getting married, these are the ways you elevate yourself in any free society. Married people tend to make more money than single people, for example. Having kids is the way that you mature. The nuclear family is the way that you build a next generation. So when you tear away at the fundamental values of all of your institutions, of all of your ideas and ideals, what you end up with is a bunch of young adults who are completely atomized and useless. You might say like Zoran Mamdani, who's a 33-year-old socialist who's never held a real job, but soon will be the mayor of the financial capital of planet Earth. According to Axios, in 1975, about half of America's 25 to 34-year-olds had done all of those things, moved out of their parents' house, gotten a job, got married, and had kids. 50 years later, less than a quarter have, according to a census working paper out this month. The way young people think about marriage and family is changing. It used to be the first step of adulthood, with financial security and an established career potentially coming after a wedding. Now it's commonly the last step. Young people want to find work, pay off debt, and live alone before looking for a partner, and these goals are harder to hit than they were for previous generations. Findings suggest young adults today prioritize economic security over starting a family, reflecting the rising burden of housing, food, gas, and other costs. Okay, that's such horse manure. This notion that young people today are wildly poor, and that is the reason why they're not getting married and having kids, is a lie. It is not true. Your grandparents were way poorer than you, and they got married at 20, and then they had a bunch of kids, and then they ended up paving the way for a better America. If you're 25 years old and unmarried, living in a $5,000 a month apartment in New York City, that is a you problem. That is your fault. Okay, the rent is not your fault. The rent is the fault of New York, which refuses to build any more housing because of all their crazy regulations. But your life decisions are your fault. I mean, this should be just baseline rudimentary morality. The decisions you make in your life are your problem. That does not mean there can't be systemic change in ways that make your decisions easier. But the vast majority of problems in your life, in the freest country in the history of the world, where you have the most wealth in the history of the world, stop blaming other people for that. But again, when you tear away things like Judeo-Christian morality and expectations of traditional gender roles, like get married, be a husband, be a dad, what you end up with is useless young people. And then those useless young people vote for other useless young people, again, like Zoran Mamdani. In 2024, 28% of young adults lived on their own with jobs. But the combination of moving out, marrying, and having kids no longer ranks among the top 5 most common milestone patterns. By the way, that is a priority issue. Because if you ask young people what they want out of life, they are not prioritizing these important things. Why? Well, because you on the left decided that somehow it was white identitarian to talk about biblical values, meritocracy, traditional family units, and traditional gender roles. Somehow that was white supremacy. Well, the result of that is precisely what we are seeing today. Okay, well, I do think that at some point, Democrats are going to have to steer back towards sanity because they can't do this. They can do it in fits and starts. They can elect a Zoran Mamdani in New York, or they can elect a Brandon Johnson in Chicago, the least popular mayor in America. You can elect an AOC in a borough of Brooklyn or something. You can do those things. But on a national level, do most Americans want that? Is that a thing most Americans want? I think the answer is no. And so it's fascinating to see as Democrats start looking for their legit 2028 candidate. Now, I know that Gavin Newsom's been making a big splash. So I asked our sponsors over at Comet, Perplexity's new web browser, I asked, what is the order of the Democratic primaries in 2028? Because it makes a very big difference in terms of who the 2028 Democratic nominee is. So if you recall, back in 2024, Joe Biden, in an attempt to stack the primaries so he would have no real competition, he was afraid that if he allowed Iowa and New Hampshire to be first in the nation for the Democrats, you might get some sort of insurgent candidacy from Bernie Sanders again, or some other left-wing member of the Democratic Party. And so he stacked it. He put South Carolina first. That, of course, was a callback to his 2020 race where he lost Iowa and New Hampshire, but then won South Carolina and basically swept the rest of the primaries. Well, the current order still retains South Carolina at the head of the primaries. However, the DNC is currently debating the calendar. Strong competition is emerging among states like South Carolina, New Hampshire, Iowa, and Nevada to obtain or reclaim early voting status. The DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee will determine the order. A decision is not expected until at least late 2025, possibly 2026. New Hampshire is fighting very hard to restore its long-held first in the nation status. But the bottom line is this. The most important state for the Democratic Party primaries is South Carolina. So if I ask, comment then, what percentage of the 2024 South Carolina Democratic Party primary electorate was black in 2024? The answer was 56% of 2024 South Carolina Democratic Party primary voters were black. In 2016, by the way, that number was 61%. So how do you think Gavin Newsom is going to do with that crowd? I mean, maybe he will do somewhat better than Bernie Sanders or Pete Buttigieg would do, but he's not going to blow it out of the park, which means the Democrats are looking to another face Who is that other face? That face is Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland. So Wes Moore has been the person who I'm hearing a lot about from my friends in the Democratic Party. I hear his name come up a lot. There are a lot of people who are very hot on Wes Moore. He, of course, is the governor of Maryland. Here was George Clooney talking up Wes Moore recently with Jake Tapper on CNN.
But who I think is levitating above that is Wes Moore. I think he is the guy that he's handled this tragedy in Baltimore beautifully. He's two tours of duty in Afghanistan, active duty. He speaks sort of beautifully. He's smart. He ran a hedge fund. He ran the Robin Hood Foundation. He's a proper leader. And Democrats, the thing is, we say Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. Although I think Republicans have fallen in love a little bit. I like him a lot. I think he could be someone we could all join in behind. We have to find somebody rather soon.
Now, again, his background, Wes Moore's, is pretty interesting. Wes Moore is very young, right? Wes Moore is 46 years old right now, which for the Democratic Party is, again, very, very young. He was born in Maryland. His dad died when he was very young. His mom moved him to the Bronx. He got involved, apparently, in petty crime as a youngster, and he ended up enrolled in Valley Forge Military Academy. And then he completed requirements for the U.S. Army's early commissioning program. He became a second lieutenant of military intelligence in the Army Reserve. He went to Johns Hopkins University. He's got his BA from there. He played wide receiver for their football team for a couple of seasons. And then he interned at the Department of Homeland Security under Tom Ridge. He ended up going to Wolfson College in Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and then served in the 82nd Airborne Division and was in Afghanistan 2005 to 2006, and he ended up leaving as captain. He was a White House fellow in February 26 under Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. He worked at Deutsche Bank in Manhattan, Citibank from 2007 to 2012. And then he ended up, of course, running for office. He became sort of a TV producer for a while. He was CEO of a charitable organization that was designed to alleviate childhood poverty. So again, this is the guy who has sort of the classic political resume. And so Democrats are very into this. And the big thing right now for Wes Moore is that as he's watching Gavin Newsom garner all the attention, he wants to jump in. He understands the primaries now start earlier than ever, and he's starting to jump in. Already coming up, President Trump talking about sending federal troops to Chicago, Democrats going nuts, plus a lot more. First, if you've been living on credit cards just to cover your groceries, your gas, your bills, those interest rates can be absolutely brutal. If you don't pay on time, you're paying like 20% or more to the banks. You could call my friends over at American Financing. They have mortgage rates in the fives. They're showing people every day how to keep more of your hard-earned money in your pocket and out of the hands of those credit card companies. Right now, American Financing is helping homeowners save an average of $800 a month by using their home equity to wipe out that high-interest debt. No upfront fees, no obligation, just a 10-minute call to a salary-based mortgage consultant. Here's the kicker. If you start today, you could delay 2 mortgage payments, putting even more cash in your hands right away. Don't wait. Call American Financing now, 866-574-2500. That's 866-574-2500, or visit AmericanFinancing.net/Shapiro. Again, it is much, much better to utilize your home equity to access your wealth than it is to access that credit card over and over and over at a 20% interest rate. And American Financing can help you fix all this, right-size yourself. Call American Financing right now, 866-574-2500, or visit AmericanFinancing.net/Shapiro. Also, Grand Canyon University. It's a private Christian university in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. They believe we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. GCU believes in equal opportunity and that the American dream starts with purpose. GCU equips you to serve others in ways that promote human flourishing and create a ripple effect of transformation for generations to come. By honoring your career calling, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. Change the world for good by putting others before yourself to glorify God. Whether your pursuit involves a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree, GCU's online, on campus, and hybrid learning environments. They're designed to help you achieve your unique academic, personal, and professional goals. With over 340 academic programs as of September 2024, GCU meets you where you are and provides a path to help you fulfill your dreams. The pursuit to serve others is yours. Let it flourish. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu. You've heard a lot about how institutions of higher education are basically soul-sucking people. That is absolutely true. It is not the case at Grand Canyon University, where they help restore your soul. Go check them out. Private, Christian, affordable, gcu.edu. President Trump has said that he was interested in sending the National Guard into Baltimore to quickly clean up crime. There's a follow-on to his use of the National Guard in order to quash crime in Washington, D.C. Now, legally speaking, the President of the United States has an awful lot more authority in Washington, D.C., which, of course, is a federal district, than he does in a city like Baltimore, which is just a city in the state of Maryland, right? States typically have police power. It is not the federal government that enforces state law or basic criminal law in the states. That is the job of the state. It is the job of the locality. Typically, legally, in order for the President of the United States to utilize the National Guard in these particular areas, he either has to cite the Insurrection Act, right? He has to say that there's some sort of riot that's taking place, or he has to send in the National Guard to help federal forces effectuate federal laws. That's what he did in Los Angeles. He said that the federal government was unable to effectuate immigration law, and the National Guard was brought in a support capacity for ICE. So it's not clear what legal authority President Trump would be citing in sending the National Guard into a place like Baltimore. Now, Baltimore has been a high crime area for a very, very long time, obviously. And the reason that The Wire took place, the HBO show, terrific show, took place in Baltimore is because Baltimore has been sort of the epicenter of American crime for decades and decades and decades, going all the way back to when David Simon was writing about it in his book Homicide. But President Trump threatened, he said, if Westmore needs help like Gavin Newsom did in LA, I will send in the troops, which is being done in nearby DC, and quickly clean up the crime. Well, nothing excites a Democrat more than being attacked by President Trump at this point. Now, this is a difference. Right? Very early on in President Trump's presidency, Democrats seem to kind of want to make nice with him. You saw this from Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. You also did see this from Wes Moore. Last December, after President Trump became President-elect Trump again, Wes Moore greeted him in the basement of the Army-Navy game. Here's what that looked like.
Mr. President, welcome back to Maryland, sir. Welcome back to Maryland. It's good to see you. In person, too. Thank you, sir. Great to see you. Great to see you. And great to have you back here. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So this is a great moment for Wes Moore to finally declare war on the President of the United States because, of course, if you wish to run for that 2028 Democratic nomination, you have to basically run against Trump first before you get to whoever the Republican nominee will be, whether it's J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or somebody else. So here was Wes Moore jumping on the opportunity, talking about how President Trump needs to get the name of Baltimore out of his mouth.
I do want to be very clear. If you are not willing to be part of the solution, keep our names out of your mouth. Specifically, Donald Trump, if you are not willing to walk our communities, keep our name out of your mouth.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, that sort of, ridiculous notion that President Trump, if you're not, he is willing to be part of the solution. That's why he's talking about sending the National Guard there. But it's not about that. It's all about the performative. The Democrats have to first pass the bar of the performative before they can get to the substantive. On CNN on Friday, he said, it's because they have not walked our streets. He said many of the comments that are being made from the White House come off as so tone deaf and so ignorant about fighting crime. They've not been in our communities. They're more than happy just making these repeated tropes about us, but not actually working with us to be able to make sure that our streets are safe and that people can have a real opportunity to feel safe in their own neighborhoods. Now, to be fair, it is pretty clear that the Democratic rule in Maryland has not been particularly beneficial for people wishing to avoid crime in Baltimore. Crime in Baltimore remains extremely, extremely high. Homicide is down over the course of the last year or two. With that said, it remains significantly higher than the rest of the country. President Trump responded, as president, I would much prefer he clean up this crime disaster before I go there for a walk. Well, yeah. The crime rates in Baltimore are extremely bad. It is the fourth most dangerous city in America, according to some recent studies. It has consistently high crime rates. There's significant problems with drugs. President Trump targeting it on the basis of it being incredibly criminal. He's not wrong to do that. But again, this does give Wes Moore the opening to basically now run against Trump, which is the thing that he wants to do more than anything else. Wes Moore then sent a letter to President Trump basically inviting him to walk the streets. Again, President Trump said, I'll walk the streets after I clean up the crime. That seems safer for me. But Wes Moore said, Dear President Trump, last week you responded to my concerns about the deployment of National Guard personnel for municipal policing in Washington, D.C. by insulting me personally from the Oval Office. So I wanted to write in order to clarify the root of my frustration and extend an invitation for you to visit Maryland, where we can discuss strategies for effective public safety policy. There's no higher priority for me as the governor of my state than the safety of my people. This is an issue of both professional and personal significance. I grew up in and around communities left behind by people in power who sought to weaponize the pain of their constituents through hollow talking points that never changed the reality on the ground. From the day I became Maryland's chief executive, I've sought a different path. We've taken an all-of-the-above approach to public safety that addresses the root causes of crime, mobilizing state resources, building strong partnerships with local jurisdictions, prosecutors, public defenders, police officers, and advocates, and ensuring greater coordination and data sharing to deliver staggering drops in violent crime. His homicides in Maryland are down statewide by 20% since my inauguration 2.5 years ago. In the first 6 months of 2025, the Baltimore PD continued to see a double-digit reduction in gun violence, including a 22% decrease in homicides and a 19% decrease in non-fatal shootings. This is basically a press release. I mean, Wes Moore sends President Trump a press release, and he says, if there's anything Maryland has proven over the last 2 years, it's that we can achieve performance without being performative. I'd like to invite you formally to attend our next public safety walk in September at a date of your choosing. So, again, I think that this is all about Wes Moore trying to wrest control of the microphone away from Gavin Newsom. And frankly, he does have an advantage. Again, Wes Moore is black. So that is going to make an awfully big difference in South Carolina in 2028. If South Carolina is the first primary state, Wes Moore has a heavy advantage going in. He just does. That is just a reality. And pretending it is not so is foolish. Right now, if you had to draw odds-on favorite for the nomination for the Democratic Party right now, Wes Moore is probably it. Again, it's not going to be hard for him to get money from people like George Clooney. He does have a moderate affect, even though his policies are not particularly moderate in the state of Maryland. He's obviously well-spoken. He seems to be politically adept. Now, can he fall into radicalism? Absolutely. So, for example, he doesn't need to do this. Once Trump has attacked him over Baltimore, he should just stick to that. Wes Moore instead is attacking Trump for sending troops to D.C. That's foolish.
It's unconstitutional. It's a direct violation of the 10th Amendment. And for a party that talks about state rights, it's amazing how they're having such a big government approach in the way they're conducting public safety.
Again, it is not unconstitutional for the president to send troops to Washington, D.C. That is fully in line with the Constitution of the United States. President Trump responded to Governor Wes Moore, who invited him to walk the city. In a post on Truth Social, Trump criticized the Maryland governor's record on crime. He said if Baltimore needs assistance, he'll send in the National Guard like he did to L.A. and Washington, D.C. He also noted he had given Moore a lot of money to fix his demolished bridge, adding he might have to rethink the decision. Governor Wes Moore of Maryland, he said, has asked in a rather nasty and provocative tone that I walk the streets of Maryland with him. I assume he's talking about out-of-control crime-ridden Baltimore. As president, I'd much prefer he clean up this crime disaster before I go there for a walk. He says Wes Moore's record on crime is a very bad one unless he fudges his figures on crime like many of the other blue states are doing. But if Wes Moore needs help, like Gavin Newsom did in L.A., I will send in the troops, which is being done in nearby D.C., and quickly clean up the crime. Now, again, it seems to me that the reactionary nature of our politics is leading everybody into some box canyons politically. Hey, the reality is that the president of the United States does not have the unilateral authority, again, unless he somehow declares that an insurrection is taking place, to simply send in the National Guard to local cities to clean up the crime. And there is a reason for that. We do not want the federal government being in the business of enforcing local law. At that point, states cease to exist. That is a problem. If you're on the right side of the aisle, that is a problem for you. Imagine Wes Moore as president of the United States. Imagine Joe Biden just a couple of years ago as president of the United States, sending in troops to enforce local law in places like Florida or Texas, picking which laws to enforce. You'd be upset about that, and you'd have a right to be upset about that. That is not how the Constitution was drawn. This is why I am less than enthused about the idea of now deploying troops to Chicago. Again, there's a difference between deploying troops to L.A. to enforce immigration law, federal immigration law, and deploying troops to Washington, D.C., which is in fact a federal district. Now, apparently, the Pentagon is planning a military deployment in Chicago, according to the Washington Post. The Pentagon has for weeks been planning a military deployment to Chicago as President Trump says he wants to crack down on crime, homelessness, and undocumented immigration, in a model that could later be used in other major cities, officials familiar with the planning said. The planning, which has not been previously disclosed, involves several options, including mobilizing at least a few thousand members of the National Guard as soon as September to what is the third most populous city in the United States. The mission, if approved, would have parallels to the polarizing and legally contested operation Trump ordered in L.A. in June. The Chicago effort would further expand Trump's use of military force domestically, even when state and local authorities call the idea unwelcome and unwarranted. Now, again, it is quite possible that a state or local authority can say they don't want to enforce federal immigration law and they obstruct federal immigration law. Then you have a good excuse to send in the National Guard. to help ICE actually enforce the law. But if what you're talking about is there are too many murders in the city of Chicago, so you're sending in the National Guard, again, unless you have some sort of legal basis for it, this is a problem. President Trump is not wrong about Chicago. He said, Chicago's a mess. You have an incompetent mayor, grossly incompetent. We'll straighten that one out probably next. That'll be our next one after this, and it won't even be tough. Now, as they say, they probably will use ICE as sort of a bootstrap for putting troops on the ground in Chicago. However, it seems to me that if Chicago wishes to keep voting for awful, awful people for their politicians, that they do, in fact, have the right to vote for terrible politicians and live with the consequences of those terrible politicians. The way that people learn not to elect bad people is by having 20 years, 30 years of crime like they did in New York City before they got the Rudy Giuliani treatment. And it seems like New Yorkers don't learn, and so they'll go right back to the well on that one. Mayor Brandon Johnson, in response to President Trump's threat to send National Guard into Chicago, he put out a statement. He says, quote, "We take President Trump's statement seriously, but to be clear, the city has not received any formal communication from the Trump administration regarding additional federal law enforcement or military deployments to Chicago. Certainly, we have grave concerns about the impact of any unlawful deployment of National Guard troops to the city of Chicago. The problem with the president's approach is that it is uncoordinated, uncalled for, and unsound. Unlawfully deploying the National Guard to Chicago has the potential to inflame tensions between residents and law enforcement when we know that trust between police and residents is foundational to building safer communities. Unlawful deployment would be unsustainable and would threaten to undermine the historic progress we have made in the past year alone. We've reduced homicides by more than 30%, robberies by 35%, shootings by almost 40%. We continue to invest in what is working." Okay, so, I mean, first of all, this is the wrong tack for Brandon Johnson to take, and for any of these blue state Democrats to take. The answer is not, we're doing an amazing job on crime. The answer is, the president doesn't have the authority to do this, right? Sure, we can do a better job on crime. Everybody can do a better job on crime. In a city in America that can't do a better job on crime. But the National Guard being deployed to the city is a violation of the constitutional order, would actually be the argument that should be made by Brandon Johnson, but he doesn't really care very much about that, of course, because he is very much in favor of the crime on sort of a general level. Senator Tammy Duckworth, she also issued a statement condemning the president of the United States. She said, "It comes as no surprise. Donald Trump is once again attacking Chicago, but that doesn't change that Trump's continuing pattern of politicizing and misusing our nation's military for his own partisan gain and to crush dissent is deeply disturbing, is un-American, and has no place in any of our cities. We know this isn't about law and order because Trump is once again refusing to coordinate with state and local officials." Now, again, President Trump would say, listen, if I coordinate with you, you're just going to thwart the actual ability to police crime. That's what happened in Los Angeles. Again, the Democrats have a unique way, a truly unique way of taking the wrong side of any argument, even when they might be constitutionally correct. It's kind of amazing. What they should be arguing is the president does not have the legal authority under the Constitution of the United States to enforce local law by the military. That is not what the military is for. Instead, they take the perspective that actually crime is okay and it's racist of Trump to offer this. And it's misuse of our military and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And so it looks like they're pro-crime, which is a really dumb way to do this. Well, here was Governor J.B. Pritzker. He also put out a tweet suggesting that Trump was trying to manufacture a crisis. Quote, "Donald Trump is attempting to manufacture a crisis, politicize Americans who serve in uniform, and continue to abuse his power to distract from the pain he's causing families. We'll continue to follow the law, stand up for the sovereignty of our state, and protect Illinoisans." Okay, so the last line there is closer to correct from J.B. Pritzker. But again, this kind of notion that Trump is manufacturing a crime crisis when, again, crime in Chicago, there's shootings pretty much every weekend in Chicago, that obviously is untrue. Here was Brandon Johnson trying to rebut claims that his city is basically run like trash.
This is who Chicago really is. What's being painted by the federal government is false. We love one another. We support one another. We put our arms around one another.
Okay, and then he continued by suggesting that actually the people of Chicago would participate in an uprising against president. So what, you're going to riot to show that crime is bad? That'd be a really stupid move, Mayor John. But then again, he is a very stupid man, so.
You know, look, the city of Chicago, one of the most diverse economies in the world, right? Again, you know, a city that has been, you know, founded and established on the values of working people. We're not going to surrender our humanity to this tyrant. I can tell you this, the city of Chicago has a long history of standing up against tyranny, resisting those who wish to undermine the interests of working people. We're not going to back down. We're not going to cower. We're not going to bend. We're not going to break. We are Chicago. We are the soul of America, and we will maintain that posture from now until.
Yeah, I don't even know what he means by that. What does he mean? That we're going to resist him? What does that resistance look like? Seriously, it is amazing how many of these people are playing directly into President Trump's hands on the radical left. With that said, President Trump moving federal troops into Chicago, that is a very fraught constitutional move at the very best. Now, there are moves that President Trump can make on crime that are pretty fascinating. So one of the ones that he is making, according to an exclusive for the New York Post, is that he's going to sign an executive order today ending cashless bail across the country, essentially attaching strings to federal funding for jurisdictions that continue to do cashless bail, which is essentially the idea that we'll just release criminals on their own recognizance around the country. Attorney General Pam Bondi will provide Trump with a list of no cash bail jurisdictions that could end up targeting states like New York, cities like Washington, D.C., or other localities with lax bail policies. A White House memo on the executive action says, quote, cashless bail policies allow dangerous individuals to immediately return to the streets and further endanger law-abiding, hardworking Americans because they know our laws will not be enforced. Arresting repeat offenders for new crimes after they've already been freed without bail is a waste of public resources and an obvious threat to public safety, the memo also notes. And so the president does have the ability to attach strings to federal funding in a lot of ways. This has been done for decades. There's nothing new about that. Now, going after jurisdictions that are releasing criminals onto the streets this way, that is within his purview. So again, I have no problem with the president fighting crime. I just want to make sure that he does it in the most legally bulletproof way so it doesn't get shot down by a court at the first available opportunity. Now, speaking of matters legal, on Friday, the DOJ released the testimony of Ghislaine Maxwell, the transcript of her interview with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. It's about 300 pages. The audio is 6 hours or so. Not a lot of big takeaways. The big takeaway is that according to Ghislaine Maxwell, there were people who were clamoring for her to talk. She was going to name the names. She was going to spill the beans. She was going to break this thing wide open, where it turns out that suddenly the Trump administration was covering for a gigantic child sex trafficking ring on behalf of foreign intelligence agencies, specifically according to many of the Jews. In any case, all of that seems to not be true. So either she's lying, in which case there's no evidence that that allegation is true, or she's telling the truth, in which case there's no evidence that that allegation is true. As I've been saying from the beginning, suspicions without evidence, maybe they're true, but at some point you do need to show, the evidence. Well, Ghislaine Maxwell did the 6-hour interview. She testified that President Trump had never engaged in any inappropriate conduct that she saw with Jeffrey Epstein. She added that she didn't believe that Epstein killed himself. And again, there is the best case here is probably Alan Dershowitz's case, who again was Maxwell's and was Epstein's lawyer. Dershowitz says that there's a good shot that Epstein did kill himself, but basically he paid the prison guards to allow him to kill himself. I mean, that is certainly a possibility. She said that Bill Clinton was very close with her, but not with Jeffrey Epstein. Todd Blanche had asked her repeatedly about her and Epstein's relationships with Bill Clinton. By the way, we know how close Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were to Clinton, particularly Ghislaine Maxwell, because as it turns out, according to CNN, Ghislaine Maxwell was actually given an honor at a prestigious Clinton event years after abuse allegations actually surfaced, which is definitely weird. That's a weird thing to do. So for all those who are saying it's a cover-up by Trump to protect Trump, maybe it's a cover-up by Trump to protect Hillary Clinton. I don't know. Maxwell said, President Clinton liked me. We got along terribly well. I never saw that warmth or however you want to characterize it with Mr. Epstein. Maxwell said there's no client list of people who associated with Epstein. She said that there's no list that she was aware of. She said also that there was no link to any intelligence agency. Now, again, maybe she's lying about all of this. That's certainly possible. She is, of course, a criminal derelict who sexually abused minors. So that is certainly a possibility. However, the absence of evidence does not strengthen your case. One of the amazing things about large-scale conspiracy theories is when no evidence emerges to support the theory, the lack of evidence is in and of itself evidence the conspiracy theory is true. It's the magic of a conspiracy theory. And it is the difference between an actual conspiracy and a conspiracy theory, as I've said many times. An actual conspiracy involves evidence of conspiratorial activity to achieve an aim. A conspiracy theory is based on speculation that such a thing is going on without any evidence. And the beautiful thing about that is that you just keep getting to use the absence of evidence as evidence that your theory is true, which is always quite delicious. Jim Jordan, representative from Ohio, he rightly points out that the Maxwell interview, again, confirms what most people were saying, which is that Trump was not involved in any way in Epstein Island shenanigans with minors.
What I know is they didn't release parts of the transcript. They released the whole transcript. And you know, so you can go through the whole thing. And of course, this confirms what we all knew. If the Democrats, if President Trump had done something wrong, you don't think the Democrats would have released that? I mean, it was their Justice Department who handled all this. You don't think the Garland Justice Department and the Chris Wray FBI would have released information? We knew President Trump didn't do anything wrong here. He said that repeatedly. This transcript is the whole transcript, and it confirms that. So yeah, I think this is there's nothing there. It seems based on what we got from the interview of Miss Maxwell.
Okay, he's not wrong about that. And if you continue to maintain the conspiracy theory in the face of no evidence, that's fine. You can do that. You should just acknowledge that there's no evidence to actually back the conspiracy theory at this point. And meanwhile, J.D. Vance did a sort of fascinating interview yesterday with Kristen Welker over at NBC on the situation with regard to Russia-Ukraine. Now, the Trump administration, President Trump in particular, has been taking the correct line on this. He got Putin to go to Anchorage. Then he went to the Europeans and he said, listen, I'm willing to do some form of security guarantee. Ukraine really has to be on board with making some territorial concessions. They're the ones who are going to have to negotiate all of that. And then the president implied very late last week that offensive weaponry should actually be used by Ukraine against Russia. That if Russia won't come to the table, you really have only one other choice, and that's to ratchet things up. Well, two things are happening that are sort of one, Russia has rejected everything. Russia continues to reject everything. They're totally intransigent. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, the guy who, again, showed up in Anchorage wearing a USSR shirt just to demonstrate what his priorities were. Sergei Lavrov, he also was on with Kristen Welker, and he proceeded to say that there was, in fact, no meeting planned between Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin.
There is no meeting planned, and I'm not challenging this. But you cannot, I think, understand what I am saying. Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky when the agenda would be ready for a summit. And this agenda is not ready at all.
Okay, so, again, he has no plans at this point. So despite all of the talk about how we were moving on to the next step, trilateral meetings and all the rest, in the end, it was always going to be about what the Russians want from the negotiation. We know what the Ukrainians want: an end to the war, security guarantees, insurance that they're not going to be invaded again. Full-scale guarantee of their independence. That's what they want. What Russia wants is Ukraine. They want to ingest Ukraine. And so Lavrov continues to claim that Zelensky is illegitimate. Well, that makes it kind of difficult to negotiate when you're saying that the leader of the person on the other side is illegitimate. And by the way, the only quote-unquote legitimate leader that Russia would ever accept is somebody who's friendly to Moscow, of course.
Irrespective of when this meeting might take place, and it must be very well prepared, the issue of who is going to sign the deal on the Ukrainian side.
So you're saying you don't see
issue.
President Zelensky as the legitimate leader of Ukraine? President Putin doesn't recognize him as the legitimate leader of Ukraine?
No, we recognize him as de facto head of the regime. And in this capacity, we are ready to meet with him.
Okay.
But when it comes to signing legal documents, now you want to have the entire picture, just part of it, which suits you. When we come to a stage when you have to sign documents, we would need a very clear understanding by everybody that the person who is signing is legitimate. And according to the Ukrainian constitution, Mr. Zelensky is not at the moment.
Okay, so what he's saying is, sure, we'll meet with Zelensky, but we'll call him illegitimate the whole time, and then we won't allow him to actually sign the documents on the other side, which is a wild position to take, given the fact that, again, if Russia wants a peace deal, which they clearly do not at this point, they feel they can continue to ratchet up the pressure. If they wanted to do something, they wouldn't be doing that. Okay, meanwhile, as I've said 1,000 times, the biggest barrier to a next Republican administration remains the economy. So on Friday, Jerome Powell signaled that he would, in fact, likely be lowering those interest rates come September. That, of course, made investors pretty happy. Investors were excited that finally the monetary supply would be loosened at least somewhat, that there would be an ability to get easier loans, that mortgage rates would go down, and all of the rest. However, the labor market continues to remain somewhat stagnant, and there is ballast to the tariff policies that President Trump has been pushing. According to the Wall Street Journal, the labor market has moved front and center for the Federal Reserve, highlighting its fragility and risks to the economy. The good news is that unemployment remains low. Employers haven't been all that interested in laying people off. The bad news is that companies haven't been all that interested in hiring either. This precarious situation means even a relatively small increase in layoffs could lead the economy to start shutting jobs, a process that can be difficult to reverse once it starts. Worries about that possibility have come to the fore at the Fed, especially after revisions included in that July employment report showed much weaker job growth in recent months than previously thought. So on Friday, Fed Chair Jerome Powell signaled that they were going to cut rates because of the risk of a deteriorating jobs market. He said if those risks materialize, they can do so quickly in the form of sharply higher layoffs and rising unemployment. We've already seen the pace of hiring slowing markedly. In June, the hires rate was just 3.3%, according to the Labor Department. That was below 3.9% in February 2020. And it was much less than the 4.6% registered in November 2021 when the job market was coming back from the pandemic. Companies were already adding new employees at a slower pace when President Trump came back into office. Then we were going to do deregulation and lower taxes and all the rest. It turns out the tariffs have thrown a wrench into all of that. So the Federal Reserve is going to try to apparently jog the markets by lowering those interest rates. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has taken a $10 billion stake in Intel. And again, I am deeply uncomfortable with this. This is not good, laissez-faire free market policy. It is not. President Trump said Friday at the White House, I said, I think it would be good having the United States as your partner. The CEO of Intel agreed. They've agreed to do it. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick confirmed that deal in a post on X on Friday. Quote, big news. The United States of America now owns 10% of Intel, one of our great American technology companies. Intel posted details of the plan soon afterward, saying the administration would make an $8.9 billion investment in Intel common stock paid for with CHIPS grant money. So basically the idea is that taxpayer money will be used to buy America a piece of Intel. A bad investment. I would not be spending $9 billion to buy a piece of Intel, would you? Because they've been in secular decline for quite a while because they've been mishandled. The company said the stake would be funded with $5.7 billion in grants previously awarded but not yet paid and $3.2 billion from a separate Department of Defense program. The CEO said, we are grateful for the confidence the president and the administration have placed in Intel. We look forward to working to advance U.S. technology and manufacturing leadership. So some Republicans are upset about this, including Senator Rand Paul. He correctly points out that this is actually a violation of free market principles and that once you're a partner with the government basically is in charge of your business. And not only that, it's too big to fail. So as Mike Schmidt and Todd Fisher write in the Wall Street Journal, the company's products business, which designs chips for computers and servers, is large and profitable, but not a national security priority. That business underpins most of Intel's roughly $100 billion market cap. What matters to national security is Intel's foundry, the manufacturing arm that could, in theory, produce chips for other companies, as well as Intel's internal products. And that foundry is struggling. It lost more than $13 billion last year. It has almost no external customers. But a government equity stake does not solve that problem. Intel can easily raise capital in public markets. There's no need for taxpayer dollars to replace what private capital is already willing to do. Unlike grants, equity comes at a steep cost to Intel. Transferring grants into equity risks putting Intel at a cost disadvantage relative to other chip makers, which are manufacturing predominantly in low-cost Asian countries and receiving direct incentives in the U.S. and around the world. And there are also practical risks because, of course, now it's politicized. The biggest problem is that Intel's 18A process has failed to secure any meaningful external customers. Intel CEO recently acknowledged that without external customers for its advanced 14A process technology, the company can't sustain leading-edge manufacturing. And again, this sort of thing here, not great. You didn't. Nationalization of American industries is a bad idea. I understand that the Trump administration is trying to do as much as it can from the executive branch of the government. They're doing it on crime. They're doing it on immigration. On immigration, they have plenary power. On crime, not so much. Doing it on the economy is not what the executive branch was designed to do. It is not. Congress should step in. Congress is an independent branch of government. The President of the United States should not unilaterally be making tariff policy. That is not what the system was designed to do. I don't like it happening, whether it is Democrat or Republican. And the grand centralization of nearly all power in the executive branch as a whole is a massive, massive institutional flaw in our republic right now. It also means that whenever we have a presidential election, it is tooth and nail. Because I guess if you grab the executive branch, then you basically run everything. And that is a huge systemic problem that the founders never would have tolerated. Alrighty, coming up, we'll get to the raid on John Bolton's house, plus Snoop Dogg speaking out against Disney. Fascinating. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.